Hello everyone, this is a video podcast designed to support the Bar Professional Training course. This is a video podcast about study skills, and what I'd like to talk about today is how you can use diagrams and flowcharts to help you remember processes and to deal with very technical information. And what I'm going to do is show you by means of a worked example to do with the commencement of civil litigation how easy it can be to take pages and pages of text from your textbooks and to turn them into a diagram that you can use for your revision purposes. So that's what we're going to be looking at, and we're going to be dealing with commencing litigation, but this is not going to be a substitute for proper reading and proper learning. All of that has to come from what you're working on out of your APA in civil litigation and the white book. So this is really as an illustration of the process of how to learn more than anything else. So, when you commence litigation, there are several processes involved: issue, service, which are claimant initiated, and then we have the response from the defendant. And students often get confused between all of the different time limits, all of the different response times, and what comes after what. So when you're reading the textbook, it's lots and lots of words, lots and lots of concepts. It's easy to get confused. What we're going to do then is draw a diagram to try and work out the main steps and the main timescales. So the first stage in the commencement of proceedings is the issue. And by that, I mean the issue of the claim form, and we're going to assume that that claim form also has particulars of claim attached. What happens is that the claim form, the particulars of claim, along with the relevant issue fee, so you need to be aware that there is an issue fee, have to be sent to the relevant office. If you're starting a claim in the county court, then that gets sent to the processing centre in Salford. That processing centre then issues all of the county court claims in the Northampton County Court. If it's in the High Court, then the High Court officers deal with the proceedings themselves. Issue is important because this is relevant to two different time limits. So when the claim form is issued, the court date stamps it with the date of the issue. That is important because it stops the limitation clock from ticking. So in other words, as long as a claim is issued before the last day of limitation, everything's fine. So we draw ourselves a clock, we mark it L for limitation, and then we cross it out to remind ourselves that the limitation clock stops ticking on issue. Once the claim form has been issued, however, that starts a new clock, and that clock is the validity of the claim form that's set out in Rule 7.5, and that's a 4-month period of time for claims within the jurisdiction. So what we can do now is draw a second clock, and that's our validity clock, and that is a period of 4 months within the jurisdiction, and of course it's 6 months outside of the jurisdiction. And we can put a little tick next to it because that clock has now been activated. Okay. The next step is service. So we draw an arrow down to service. Now what needs to happen is not that the claim form is actually served on the last day of the 4th month of the validity. What needs to happen is that the claimant has to take the required step by midnight on the last day of the validity. So that's a little note that we have to remind ourselves of in relation to that 4-month period. And then service happens by one of the permissible methods. What we do need to remember, something that's very important, is the deemed date of service. So once the claim form is put in the post box, because putting it in the post box is the required step to effect service, once the claimant has put the claim form in the post box, as long as they've done it before midnight on the last day of the validity, that's absolutely fine. And then the claim form will be deemed to be served on the second business day after the required step. And that is very important as a piece of information for us to remember. So that is part of our service diagram. And of course, then the service is on the defendant. The defendant then has to decide what they're going to do. The chances are they'll want to get advice and they'll want to prepare their case because they're going to dispute the claim. But they have a choice of 3 different options of what they are going to do. They can either acknowledge, or they can admit, or they can defend. And whatever of these choices they decide to do, they have 14 days from the deemed date of service to do that. But the advantage, if they acknowledge, is that they buy themselves another 14 days in which they can defend. So if you want, you can put a little 14 next to each arrow to remind you of the amount of time that you have. And this is the option that buys you the most time. Of course, there is one final choice that is available to the defendant, and that is to do nothing. And if they do that, then after 15 days or more, the claimant can apply for default judgment. And what is the result of default judgment? Game over for the defendant. So what we have here is a very simple diagram, so simple it can fit on a single piece of paper that summarises all of the major steps in the commencement of proceedings. Obviously, once we have a defended claim, then the process of provisional allocation to track occurs. We then go through case management, and then the court will decide eventually which court, which track the matter is allocated to, but that's something to worry about another time. This is simply an illustration of how you can use flowcharts and diagrams to illustrate complex topics and detailed processes. Thank you very much.